And now I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Leadership and Development, Leading Change with Emotional Intelligence. I'm going to hand things over to our featured presenter today. She is no stranger to our webinars and our leadership and development sessions, and she's also an executive leadership coach, Erin Cambier. Erin, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Marianne. I appreciate it. And if we do have any technical challenges, if for some reason my video is not keeping up with my lips moving, Marianne knows she has full permission to let me know. Sometimes we just pause the webcam so that you can, it cannot be a distraction, but can be a value-added tool so that you can hear the audio good as well. So I'd like to welcome you guys to today's webinar. I'm really excited to talk about this topic because leading change is obviously a critical skill for all of us, whether we are in leadership or want to be in leadership. And as we know, our world is ever changing. The last year has definitely been a demonstration of that. And we're going to talk about our emotional intelligence and how that integrates into our ability to lead change and how we can utilize our emotional intelligence to help ourselves go through change as well as to lead our teams through that more effectively. All right. Little introduction here about my background and why I'm here to share this content with you. I've spent my entire career, more than 20 years, in leadership and development. I'm a certified career coach, and my background is also, prior to being a consultant, also leading corporate change. Let me hold on. I'm hearing echo. Can you guys hear that?
I did for a brief second.
Okay. I was just hearing my feedback a little bit, but it's gone away, so we're good. So change is something that I actually really enjoy and am passionate about because I've seen the positive benefits of change. And you may be someone who is similar to that. I think that many people that I interact with are that way, or you may be the complete opposite. No matter what your feelings are associated with change, you're in the right place because we're going to talk about how to effectively lead your teams through change. Here's an overview of our objectives. We will discuss some critical skills in leading our teams through change, as well as how to leverage your emotional intelligence to build a better workplace and help your teams through change. And then how to expand your effectiveness as a leader in, as I mentioned, that ever-changing world that we live in. In the middle of change, there's usually two types of people. There is the person who is thinking, when will this be over? How long is this going to last? I just want to get through this. And sometimes I've been there also, but I suggest that make a shift to that higher level of thinking, which isn't just how do I go through this, but how can I grow through this? How can I, as an individual, how can I help my teams grow through this? While I'm in the midst of this, what can I learn to help make myself better or make my teams better? How can I make this change or this hurdle or this situation a stepping stone instead of a roadblock? So first, let's talk about the need for a new type of leadership. Our world, as we know it, is uncertain. Our business world, our economy, our personal lives, our professional lives, everything has shifted, especially over the last couple of years. We are now more globally connected than ever. We've had to utilize flexible working relationships. Many of us are maybe still working remotely and had never worked remotely prior to a year ago, but are still adjusting. What does that look like? What kind of relationship? How do I build relationships with my teams, with my colleagues, even with my customers? We have access to more knowledge than we've ever had before as a global business community. We have shorter lifespans for technology. We're able to develop products even faster. All of these things are good things. Globally connected world, ability to work remotely. They're all very positive things. But in a situation where we're in a fast-paced world, it really requires us as leaders to continue to make shifts. If we want to show up as a leader that's able to make an impact, we have to be able to change with the environment. So it is very important that we lead and operate by our principles, values, and beliefs. There's a couple bullets we have listed on the screen here. I just want you to take a pause, and these are things that you might think and like, yep, I know that, I got that. But I really want you to take a pause because it is imperative for leaders to know who they are as leaders, where they fit in the organization, what type of leader they want to be, where they're going, and why they are going there. Because if we're living out those good values and we're operating from that place, then we can much easier lead our teams through change and through the next steps. It is all about the people. Great leaders, especially leaders who are wanting to drive change, remember that it is all about the people. It's not just we do the tasks and then hopefully people are happy in this process. It really is, how can I pour into my team, develop my team, create a high-performing team? Everything is about the people. And when we do that, we start with operating with vision and purpose. If you're not being defined by vision and creating a purpose for the future, then you are left leading only from memories of the past. And while knowing what happened in the past is valuable, I'm not saying we should forget about what happened, at the same time, we don't want to be predictable and stay only in these same patterns and routines that we can never break out of. You won't be able to change, nor will you be able to lead your team through change. Great leaders then, when they're operating with vision and purpose, are able to cast that right perspective. It says, even if they don't have all the answers, many times, most times when we're going through change, we don't have all the answers, right? We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow necessarily, but we can still cast vision because we can still give hope. We can still give encouragement. We can still give security. There is a lot of uncertainty, but you can still lead with certainty in terms of who you are, who you're going to be as a team, and what you're going to put out to them. There's some good self-reflection questions here on the screen. So I want you to think about and ask yourself, what are your priorities, and do your actions match your priorities? And I want to add to that also when going through change, because maybe you're great at that when you're in a place of everybody's operating at, we're performing at our best and there's not a lot of change going on. But when change enters in, what are your priorities, and do your actions match your priorities? Are you willing to stand up for those things? And in times of flux and transformation, will you then be able to set direction? If you have prepared in the right way, the answer to that will be yes. If you have spent some time building up your emotional intelligence, which we're going to talk about in just a moment, you will much easier be able to get through adversity and stand by and know what your values are and operate from that place of being able to stand up for your values and priorities while supporting your team, while providing encouragement, etc. Remember that just like steel is formed in fire, the same thing happens when we go through adversity. It makes us a better leader if we actually work on ourselves and grow in that process. If it's not just about getting through it, but it's about how can I make the best of this, and how can I look at myself and my team and help us grow through that time period. So in order to lead through change, it's important that we think about the culture of innovation that we're creating. And this is two parts, meaning maybe you're in the midst of change right now and there's chaos, organizational or a reorganization at your company, just a lot of transition happening. Or maybe your company is going through maybe some slower changes, but if you're going through slower changes, know there will be some fast changes ahead of you. So creating a culture of innovation can happen in both places. It is best to happen if you're not in the period of fast change, because it is much harder to pour into our teams at that time in a way of actually growing their ability, their emotional intelligence, but you still can. What I'm saying is that if you aren't in a period of fast change, the time to prepare is now. The time to create a culture of innovation is right now. When you have a team who embraces these concepts, who embraces innovation, it becomes much easier to have things change, because our business world, our weekly, our daily, our monthly, our annual goals, they're constantly evolving. We do have goals and challenges, but in the course of that, we have to be able to manage ourselves, have courageous conversations, apply reflective listening, challenge the status quo, make evidence-based decision-making, collaborate, and be resilient. again, this is not necessarily probably something new in terms of a rocket science information I'm sharing, but I want you to take a pause and think about, first of all, how am I exhibiting these traits with my team? Number one. And second, are there areas that my team needs to grow in this list? How are we doing as a team or as a group? All of these skills, all of these traits we listed here, these are all traits that are built through actually developing your emotional intelligence. You can't necessarily just wake up and decide, you know what, I don't feel like I've been a courageous leader, so I'm going to be a courageous leader tomorrow. You can make the decision, but it's not an overnight change. That's what I mean. So you have to really consistently work on your emotional intelligence, some things that are the core of what is courage? What are the behaviors that drive that? What are some of the fears that are holding me back? What are the emotions that are triggering a behavior that doesn't exhibit courage? And how can I help redirect those to make some better decisions, have some better behaviors that reflect courage? This is where emotional intelligence comes in. If you're not familiar with emotional intelligence, it is impacting you every single day, whether you know it or not. Improving our emotional intelligence helps us in everything from our personal to our professional lives. Our moods, our communication, our problem solving. It helps you also develop a better culture of innovation if you improve your emotional intelligence. It helps you lead your teams more effectively through change, better manage your own stress, solve problems more effectively, and get through harder situations, all by building your emotional intelligence skills. So emotional intelligence, if you're wondering what in the world is she talking about, emotional intelligence is basically being smarter with your feelings. Emotions are data. They help us process the world around us. I mentioned you're using your emotional intelligence right now. Everything that you see, hear, feel, taste, and touch is being brought in constantly through your limbic system. And then your conscious mind decides, what do I do with this data? So emotional intelligence is being smarter with the data that is coming in. Most of us know that there's a world of difference between book smarts and street smarts. Emotional intelligence isn't necessarily just in the category of street smarts, but that's how I will describe it. It's an intangible one, and that's where the idea of emotional intelligence is rooted from. We have a full, of course, 3-day class where we go much more deep dive into explaining the science behind emotional intelligence, but I'm going to get to how you can use and grow your emotional intelligence through change in this webinar. So intelligence for successful leaders. This slide touches a little bit more on IQ versus EQ. So having a high IQ, as you may already know, does not automatically translate into success in the workplace. Research shows that a multifaceted view of intelligence. So emotional intelligence is also known as EI. So if you see the term EI in the webinar, that's what that means, emotional intelligence plus IQ. Emotional intelligence is actually the foundation of what you do every single day, and it is found to be the single biggest driver of success in the workplace. A book that I really like about emotional intelligence is listed there. It's called Emotional Intelligence 2.0 by Bradbury and Graves. They tested emotional intelligence along 33 other important workplace behaviors, and they found it supersedes time management, communication, even decision making. Because if you improve your emotional intelligence, you will then all of a sudden be a better decision maker as a result. You'll be a better communicator. You'll be better at managing your time. That doesn't mean you shouldn't attend a time management training or develop your time management skills, but it means if there's only one skill that you want to develop, I always suggest it's your emotional intelligence first, then build on the other skills after that. Emotional intelligence ranks highest in the workplace competencies for success. 90% in their studies, 90% of high performers were high in emotional intelligence. They have ways that they ranked and studied. Actually, the ranking is called emotional quotient or EQ. So 90% of high performers are high in emotional intelligence, and 70% of low performers are low in emotional intelligence. So you can be a high performer and have low emotional intelligence, but obviously the likelihood is the chances are pretty slim. They also found that people with high emotional intelligence actually make more money. to the tune of $29,000 more a year, to be exact, than those with low emotional intelligence. According to Bradbury and Graves, every point increase in emotional intelligence adds $1,300 in annual salary. And they said these findings are true for people in all industries and all regions of the world. They said they cannot find a position where emotional intelligence is not related to success. So it's obviously pretty important, but as you know, as a leader going through change, it's a highly emotional time. It's a time when maybe your emotions are up and down and your teams are also. So this is why the skill of emotional intelligence is so critical to build, especially before periods of fast-paced change. But if you're in it right now, there's no better time than the present to focus on building emotional intelligence for you and your teams. So just briefly, how emotions help us perceive the world is that first, everything happens in our brain through our emotional brain. This is that limbic system that I mentioned, taking in all the things that are happening around us. So these emotions happen first. These come out, as mentioned in the slide here, feelings, mood, energy, etc. And then second, our cognitive brain kicks in. So emotional brain first, cognitive brain second. Now you might think, I'm a not emotional person, I don't react emotionally, but this is the way our brains are wired. This is science, you can't change it. So your ability, the way that you respond to your emotions is probably different than other people, but you still, everything happens first through our emotional brain, second through our cognitive brain. Our cognitive brain is where we make decisions. That's where our rational thought happens. That's where the power of memory, creativity, etc. And this is why it's so important that we don't want to be driven just by our emotions, because we're really obviously then inhibiting our ability to be successful and make good decisions. I included this slide briefly because I just wanted to note that all emotions are valid, and that some people, when they say I'm too emotional, I react too emotionally, it doesn't mean that your emotion is invalid, but you may want to change how you behave as a result, that decision making. You want to actually have a decision happen between the emotion and your behavior and your action. That's where emotional intelligence comes into play. So our internal environment is engaging with our external environment through our emotional intelligence. Our brain is wired to react emotionally because many times this pushes us to make a decision. When we lived in a time where there were giant saber-toothed tigers that chased us, and we had to be able to outrun them or hide to stay alive, emotional intelligence was even more critical, because the ability to have an emotion and react right away and flee was critical. So now, of course, the stakes are lower. We're not running away from giant saber-toothed tigers, but anger, for example, serves a purpose. Anger sometimes can propel us to have a tough conversation, to take action, to change things or stop things or make a shift. So it is not actually the emotion that is a good or bad thing. The emotion just is. What we do with it is what emotional intelligence is deciding what to do as a result of those emotions. Okay, so I included this slide, which is the 5 key components of emotional intelligence. We don't, in a 1-hour webinar, have time to go into all the details of these things, but I pulled out what I think are the key highlights, especially that are relevant to leading through change. And we're going to focus on one of these traits, which is self-awareness. During our full 3-day class, obviously we go deep dive into each of these, not only understanding them, but understanding some of the automatic responses that our brains and bodies have, and how we can actually rewire some of those automatic responses that happen. Because much of what we do, in fact, I pulled this stat, 95% of what we do, of who we are, by the time we are 35 years old, is actually just a memorized set of, I call them programs. Some people call them just kind of running on autopilot, but that memorized set of behaviors, thoughts, emotional reactions, those unconscious habits, 95% of what we do happens from this really kind of running like a computer program. So someone can say, I want to change. I want to be more courageous, for example, the one I gave earlier. But the body and the unconscious mind operate differently. So if 95% of what we're doing is just happening on autopilot, how do we begin to even make those changes? And that's where emotional intelligence comes into play. What separates the conscious and the unconscious mind, usually it's our analytical mind that's holding us back, right? We get into our head a little bit too much, and that's where the practice of meditation comes in. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. But through practice, when you apply and utilize the skills of meditation, you actually rewire your brain that helps you make better decisions and be able to get through and actually increase your emotional intelligence. We'll talk about that in just a moment, but don't wait for the crisis. Most of the time we change in the middle of, oh, things just become so bad that we're forced to change. Don't wait for that. Start working on yourself, on your team right now. That way, when the change approaches, when those things happen, you can learn and grow in that process, but you've been able to do that, the most growth in a place of joy and success rather than the opposite. So the foundation of those 5 components is self-awareness. And that's the one I pulled out for our webinar today because it really is so critical to improving your emotional intelligence. Of course, what you don't recognize, you can't grow, you can't change. So if you're not aware of what you're doing, why you're doing it, and even the way it's affecting others, you're not going to be able to make any changes. Self-awareness is not about discovering some deep, dark secrets. It's really about developing an honest, straightforward understanding of what makes you, you. People who are high in self-awareness also have a high understanding of what things they do well and the things that trigger them, the situations, the people, high stress situations, and what they might do wrong. People who are high in self-awareness don't necessarily use that knowledge to criticize themselves or judge themselves or beat themselves up. High self-awareness means that I am aware and I use that to actually become better, not to become shameful. Interestingly enough, studies also show that as your self-awareness increases, people's life contentment in general also increases. And it's so important to have good self-awareness that in that study I mentioned earlier by Bradbury and Graves, they found that 83% of people that are high in self-awareness were also top performers and high in emotional intelligence. So self-awareness is a really critical skill in improving your emotional intelligence. So I want you to take a pause. You might think, I'm already self-aware, I know it all. And if you did think that, I challenge you, because the most dangerous place we can be is I know it all, or I've heard this before. There's a reason you're hearing something again if you've already heard it previously, and it's an opportunity for you to do something with it or do something different. So let's talk about developing your self-awareness. It says being truly emotionally aware and able to express your authentic feelings is difficult, especially professionally, right? Truly emotionally aware and able to express your authentic feelings. Really think about, how do I do that every day? Where do I rank? Scale of 1 to 10. And do I have an opportunity for growth? A good way to improve this or elevate this is just to shut off autopilot. It's truly just to start to, I call it like our self-awareness radar. It's like I've put it up and I've started to be more self-aware, and I'm starting to take notice of my emotions as I go through the day. What things trigger me? What people or situations trigger me? Maybe it's maybe you had a bad experience initially on a webcam meeting online. And so now every time you get online in a meeting, you can just feel your blood pressure raising, your heart is racing faster. You can feel your face is getting red. Some of those physical changes, you may not even be aware that you remember that situation that happened in the past, but you notice every time I get on that webcam, all these physical changes are happening. That's an indication, and that's just an opportunity to look at, okay, what's going on within me emotionally? Because if my stress triggers are going up, likely I'm not able to then bring my best in that webcam, that online dynamic, if that's what's going on. So we're taking notice, we're identifying triggers, And then we're starting to learn to be honest with ourselves. We can then determine what are some things that I want to improve or want to change. And remember that we cannot change everything overnight. We don't need to be different people by tomorrow, but we can focus on one thing. If you're 1% better today than you were yesterday, how many days is it going to take to be 100% better? You can use your fine math skills and figure that out, but not too long. But we can't change everything overnight. So starting with self-awareness is the most critical place. Some other things to do in developing your self-awareness, in addition to just putting up that self-awareness radar and being more aware of your words, your actions, your behaviors, your feelings, is ask for feedback. Verbally ask for feedback from your team, from your colleagues, from your supervisor. Maybe you want to conduct a survey, a written survey. There's plenty of places you can find that online, or you can just create your own on SurveyMonkey and send it out. But really one of the best ways is just to start to recognize your emotions. And we have written down there, recognize and record, because this is what's going to help you look for patterns and identify patterns. So I'm going to give an example here. I mentioned in the beginning, I actually really appreciate change. I like change. I like new things. And I have had to learn in leadership that not everybody likes change. Not everybody's going to have that enthusiastic attitude that I, not always, but typically do have about change. So in adapting that, I have had to be more self-aware of the emotions that happen when people are resistant to change. Because I used to think, why would you act like that? Why would you not want to learn and grow? Why would you not want a new thing? But not everyone is like that. So develop your self-awareness. Look for those emotional changes, emotional shifts that you have in response to other people, and identify some of those patterns. What that allowed for me to do is actually to be more patient, to stay in the place of listening to where my team was at and really hearing their concerns, helping them to feel encouraged and validated. And many times teams just need to be heard and understood, and then may get to that place of being able to embrace and go through change. But my ability, I had to start with me first and looking at how was I responding to their ability or inability to get through change, and make some adjustments in my own style first, so then I could help my team also learn and grow in that. There is no, apply these 10 easy steps to increase your emotional intelligence, or 10 easy steps to lead through change. There isn't. It is an ongoing path of growth and development that will constantly be evolving, but your ability to grow your self-awareness will then also encourage your team to help them grow their self-awareness, which obviously then helps everybody grow. So as you're starting to be sort of more self-aware, I want to encourage you, do not judge your emotions. So the example I gave earlier about me recognizing that it was a trigger for me if people were just not even wanting to hear about change and not even wanting to try a new thing, it was actually triggering an emotional response in me. I would get super frustrated and mad. And now I'm not somebody who has ever, hopefully, verbally berated people. I had my own unhealthy responses to that. So I had to start to recognize this emotion that was happening in me, but I didn't want to recognize it and then go to a place of, oh, Erin, you're so stupid, or any other judgment. It's recognizing it and then deciding, okay, I know that having this emotion and then going down this other path is not serving me. I want to go down a more healthy path when I have that emotion. So there is no such thing as a good or bad emotion. Remember, they exist scientifically for a purpose. Our emotions exist to tell us something. When we can recognize what it's telling us and then do something positive with it, that is high emotional intelligence. You cannot control your emotions, but you can control what you do with it. You can start to make some shifts into your behaviors as a result of those emotions. So recognize that all of those emotions, though they don't always feel comfortable, are there for a purpose. Lean into that. So rather than avoiding a feeling or numbing a feeling, your goal should be to start to think about, why does this make me so angry? And that way you can work through it. So there is a difference. Some people will recognize, yep, I'm angry, but then they go right to numbing that. That's not emotional intelligence. It's not just recognizing the emotion, but it's then deciding to do something positive with it. So I mentioned earlier about meditation, and that is a tool to improve your mindfulness. So mindfulness is one of the most powerful ways to elevate your emotional intelligence. And mindfulness is really just being present. I mentioned earlier, 95% of our day we are on autopilot. So being able to improve our emotional intelligence really is kind of like pressing pause on autopilot, and it's being mindful. It means you're able to be in the moment at any given time. You're able to pay attention to the details in real life and in your external environment, as well as what's happening internally. Because the autopilot response for me, when I met resistance with change, my autopilot was to get angry and frustrated, figure out how to force it down their throat more. And I don't mean that in a physical way, but I mean, I just became, I did this more. Well, that, as you know, frequently does not produce the results that we want. So if I can become more mindful and present that, okay, I recognize I'm angry and maybe I need to step away. I still give myself permission. But now, instead of pushing harder because I'm angry, I actually use as an opportunity to be more open, and I force myself to start to listen more and hear where my team is at. So it forces me actually to try to let my guard down in that case when I'm trying to lead a team through change and I find myself, becoming frustrated or angry. So mindfulness is a bit different than meditation. I mentioned earlier, meditation is a tool to help you become more mindful. Meditation you can do through apps. There's a lot of different tools and resources online, but truly it's just being present and taking a few minutes to have focused, quiet time. We have so many things going on every day, especially now with technology. We are always multitasking. We have emails popping up, our phones, messages popping up, maybe social media popping up throughout the day. And then somebody's walking in our office if we're in a physical office. If they're not, we're getting instant messages. There's a million things happening. So focus is an endangered species right now. Our ability to just shut out everything else and focus is really hard to do. And that's why it's so much more critical now more than ever. And if you're leading your team through change, meditation is one of the best tools in your toolkit. 10 minutes a day. Start with 2. If you've never meditated, start with 2 minutes a day where you just shut everything else down. You're quiet. Maybe you use a guided meditation app to help you shut down the other sights and sounds from the rest of the world. But meditation is a tool that actually helps you break through connecting the subconscious and conscious mind. It builds the muscle of mind control so that in the future, when I'm in that moment where I'm getting really angry, that I have formed new brain pathways during my time of meditation that allows me to practice the pause. That I don't just have to go on autopilot, feel the emotion, have a behavior, feel the emotion, have a behavior. I'm not saying I've perfected this, guys. We are all a work in progress all the time. I have emotional responses still that I look back and reflect because I hopefully am being self-aware and go, yeah, that wasn't my best. So spending more time or having time in meditation actually allows us to form new brain pathways. So cool, that actually help us even when we're not in those meditative states. So if you are not familiar with meditation and don't practice it, I really encourage you, read more about it, learn more about it, start to apply it in your everyday. The studies show that 3 times a day, 10 minutes, 3 times a day will significantly change your leadership impact, your happiness overall, and your ability to be more aware of how you think, how you act, and your ability to increase your emotional intelligence. There's one thing I wanted to mention. I'm going to go back here for 1 second. Whoops. The process of becoming more aware of how you think and how you feel is called metacognition. And the more you do this, the easier it becomes to do. And when we are in a place of meditation, what I wanted to mention, the power of this, it's like, think about planting a garden. Before you go out and just start watering or throw the seeds in the ground, you're going to prepare the soil. You're going to get all the rocks out. You're going to soften up the soil so that it's not hard. You're going to remove the weeds in the process. You're going to prune that area as the seeds keep growing. That's what meditation does for us and for our mind. It's allowing us to be in this place where we can put a pause on some of the programs that automatically run and decide which programs do we want to run that will serve us and help us, and what are the ones that we want to be more present in the moment to fully engage and maybe make better decisions. So when we do that, it allows us to better use our emotions during conversation. This is something that if you haven't focused on or been aware of, this is a really powerful shift. Using your emotions during conversation definitely requires a conscious effort. And this requires you knowing what emotion am I feeling or processing, and also recognizing what emotions they are feeling and exhibiting during that conversation. You may not be able to obviously know what they're feeling, but recognizing what they're communicating in that process. So it's important to remember that your emotions are not the enemy, that when you use them, you can actually facilitate better conversations for yourself and for others. If I know that I'm triggered in a certain situation or a certain dynamic, and I have enough self-awareness to recognize that I'm about to be triggered or I'm starting to be triggered, then I will always be able to practice the pause, depending upon the dynamic. Now, if it's a life-saving situation and lives are at risk, I'm not going to say, I'm going to need to practice the pause here and step away for 5 minutes. But most of the time, our ability to practice that pause and step away, even if it's just for 5 minutes, will serve us very, very well. If you notice they're getting elevated or you're getting elevated, I have never regretted stepping away and taking a few minutes to clear my mind. But I have regretted pushing through and just being like, doing this because I have to get my point across while I'm triggered or while I'm in a very highly emotional state. So use your emotions to fully receive everything that person is trying to communicate. This is where shutting off autopilot is important. Pressing pause on that program that's running. So I've got my self-awareness up, and maybe I'm just previously have just been listening for what I need to hear, but instead this time I'm really looking at the person and I'm noticing their body language, or I'm noticing tone more. I'm noticing their words aren't congruent with their body language, and really there's something more going on that if I take a moment to pause and work through will help them more effectively get through change than if I just push through and try to push my agenda. So leading through change requires a style that's purposeful, authentic, and agile for working across a diverse and chaotic terrain. If you have done any class with me or you do any class with me in the future, I use the word purposeful very much, because as leaders, we tend to just be on that autopilot so much. So increasing our emotional intelligence and increasing our leadership effectiveness by being purposeful shifts everything. And being authentic as a leader, we're going to talk about that here on the next slide, is so critical. I want to talk about these bullets here. It says to thrive and change, leaders must be able to serve the best interests of all, not just the people who are excited about change. And I say that lightheartedly because I, in leadership previously, had a really hard time with that and had to recognize that the people that were resistant to change, after they got on board, they were actually some of our best advocates and best performers. That they were not necessarily bad people. It's just the way that they reacted to change was different than the way I reacted to change. And if I'm leading in a way that's serving the best interests of all, I'm hearing where they're at and I'm helping them step through that process. I'm learning more about and valuing each individual, encouraging collaboration, establishing connections, and listening. Listening. All of these things, when you focus on growing your emotional intelligence, all of these things will grow as a result. When you start with self-awareness and start to become more self-aware of how your words impact others, how your emotions impact you and impact others, you will by default start to increase some of these things as well. Authentic leadership. So authenticity is one of those areas, this falls under emotional intelligence because trust, authenticity, all of those things really go hand in hand, right? Leading with integrity is about being an authentic leader. This is so critical all the time, but especially in going through change. If the team senses that your agenda is not them or supporting them is something else, you will lose your team. You could be doing all the right things to encourage collaboration, or on the slide we had that big list, but if you do not have authenticity and trust, you don't have anything. So it is critical that you're focusing on authentic leadership all the time, especially in change. Your teams want authenticity. They don't want perfection. You don't have to be a leader who has all the answers, who knows all the things. In fact, you are a stronger leader making a bigger impact if you can be honest and say at times, you know what, I don't know, but let me find out the answer. Or, you know what, I don't know, but I think Sue would be a great resource. Why don't you talk to Sue or whatever that is? But being genuine, authentic, transparent you is always more effective than being perfect. Trust takes a long time to earn, of course, but it can be lost quickly. So some key things to keep in mind is keep your people first. And I said keep, it says put, but put and then keep people first in all of your decisions. Your actions have to support your words. You lead by example. You are a truth teller always, even if it's not a truth that you feel like is going to feel good to them. If they know you're a leader who tells the truth and is honest with them all the time, they will respect you to no end. Stay connected to your team. This means letting them have access to you, that they can see you, that they can have one-on-one conversations with you, that they can interact with you, but you also remain, you have your head above the crowd. You don't keep stuck in the weeds per se, that you stay focused on big picture decisions, and then you help your teams to see it too because of the power of those connections. You have clear values while remembering uncertainty is okay. And then when you do that, it becomes much easier to act in accordance with those values. Remember that authenticity in leadership is imperative if we are to build trust-based relationships. And what I want to challenge you with is when I work with, so I coach individuals and I also coach teams and groups. Individuals might be a CEO or might be a new leader or someone who's wanting to promote to leadership. I will tell you that one of the most common areas that falls into a blind spot is our authenticity. I've rarely met a leader who says, oh, I know I'm not authentic, or I don't want to be authentic, or I don't want to build trust with my team. I'm okay if the trust gets, severed a little bit. Never, ever. Never have I met someone, sorry, can you still hear me, Mayanne?
Yep, can still hear you.
Okay, good. There was a little beep in my webcam, so I wanted to make sure. So never has this come up, but I will tell you that when I work with, so if I work with a leader and the team, very frequently the team has a different perception of that leader's authenticity and trust level than what the leader has. It's not because the leader has a bad heart or wants to be disconnected, but there is very often a disconnect. And this is because their behaviors aren't necessarily in accordance with what they think and believe. So for example, if I decide I want to be a leader who is honest and building trust-based relationships with my team, but yet I kind of dance around topics and I don't give direct feedback, even when the team knows there might be a tough message to be heard or said, and I just kind of gloss over it all the time, it might not be my heart that I want to be not authentic, but my team will perceive that as that someone is being disingenuous. And that will impact the trust level. So this is where your self-awareness radar is so, so critical, guys, that you are constantly thinking about not just, your intentions, but also what am I doing? What are the thoughts I'm having? What are the emotions I'm having? What are my behaviors and how is that being perceived by the team? And then consistently making adjustments so that I can build that transparency and authenticity and trust levels with my team. So as we know, when we're going through a fast period of change, we can become even more dependent upon technology. And in the past year, we likely have become, again, even more dependent upon technology because it's allowed us to stay connected. And technology is not a bad thing. It is a good tool when we use it in the right way. So what I want to encourage you with this slide is remember that the high dependency on technology has implications for businesses, both positive and potentially negative, depending upon what we do with that as leaders. Remember that how people interact and build relationships is changing, that we have more ability than ever to interact, with webcam, just like today. We have the ability to interact. However, we are all social and emotional by nature. Whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, you are social and emotional by nature, and trust is built through personal interactions. It is not built just by technology. So we can use technology to help us be a tool in that, but remember that personal interactions should be at the core of that. We don't want to become too dependent on, obviously, instant message, email, even text serves a purpose, but it does not, it's more of a just a logistical purpose. It is not going to help you necessarily build trust. Anytime you have a conversation to be had, anytime you're trying to build a relationship, at the very least, a phone call, and ideally having some type of face-to-face interaction. If you are in the same office, a face-to-face interaction or a video conference. Technology is not a substitute for communication, and this is where, tying into emotional intelligence, that many times we can become just reliant and kind of on autopilot and operating from just maybe sending emails all the time or maybe sending instant messages. But if you're in leadership, you need to be building a personal connection with your team. Don't think that that can just happen on its own. So remember the power of that and building trust. Intuition. Our intuition is so important in leadership, and especially if you're going through a period of fast change. It is critical in a fast-paced, chaotic environment to be able to make judgment calls based on our intuition in addition to our logic. So it says leaders must develop the capacity to deal with uncertainty and risk. And this is tied directly with our emotional intelligence. That the more we build up the traits for our emotional intelligence, the more we will be able to make good decisions quickly, and not necessarily react just emotionally, but know that I've, have an emotional response, but I'm still applying what I feel like is the best logical decisions, and I'm not being driven by my emotions or my feelings. We cannot choose our feelings, remember, but we can choose our actions. This is also where your ability to build up your team, pour into your teams, and delegate becomes really critical. Because if you are so overloaded with all of these things to do and a to-do list that is not building people up and doesn't have your plate full of being able to have time to encourage your teams, then you're not going to be able to lead in the most effective manner. So you have to save time for the things that matter most. And the things that matter most are your people. Is your ability to cast that vision, cast hope, build them up, encourage them. So you cannot and should not be the only person on your team who knows how to do a certain task. If it is a daily, weekly, monthly task, I challenge you to ensure at least one other person knows how to do that at the very least, and that you consistently are up-leveling the things that you're delegating, because it will help you become a better leader. You'll be able to pour into your teams in new and better ways. Great leadership requires adaptability. That last bullet about dealing with uncertainty and risk, a great leader is flexible and knows that change is not going to be able to happen just like, let's say I have a plan for what kind of change is going to come about, and I develop this plan. A great leader knows the plan isn't going to just happen exactly like I laid it out. Yes, I will have a plan, but I will also be highly flexible and adaptable during the course of that, because my end goal isn't just to have this happen, but it's to have that change happen with the team and the best process and the best course of that process. A phrase that, if you've heard of John Maxwell, he's a leadership speaker and author and has written a ton of great books. on change, tied to emotional intelligence also. And the phrase he says is, adjust your way to victory. And when you take that mindset, knowing that I don't have to have all the answers, I actually just have to remain transparent, adaptable, and close to my team and continue to encourage them, and that's going to make me the best leader, becomes very freeing actually in leadership. I want to share a quick example. We're okay on time. I want to share a quick example of, think about a good coach who is leading a sports team. The coach will go into that game, they'll have, watched the video from the other team, maybe looked at stats, looked at what their players are, made a plan for what his players are going to do, and how they're going to defend and have offense with that other team. And good coaches do that all the time. But the best coaches are the coaches that at halftime or even throughout the game look at that and recognize, oh gosh, it's not working to have my big player on their big player. We need to switch up our defense. I know I have a plan A through Z, but we actually need to figure out a plan number 1 right now. And we're going to execute that. We're going to make those adjustments at halftime so that we can give our best in this situation and dynamic. It's the same thing in leadership, and it's the same thing in leading our teams through change. We have to be flexible and adaptable, and that's where success comes. So harnessing the power of change, we can turn complexity and change into a positive. And that's where it falls into that harnessing the power of change, that we have to be able to embrace change and use it for positive. So successful leaders find ways to get people emotionally committed to change. That's the hard part, right? It's not just getting them to do something you want them to do, but it's to get them emotionally committed. And that's why emotional intelligence is at the foundation of driving change for you and for your teams. Understanding what drives your teams, motivating, inspiring, and engaging them, demonstrating trust, respect, and empowerment, establishing a strong sense of meaning and purpose. At the core of this, we are always putting our people first. We are serving them, we are lifting them. And when we go through change in a way that this change is going to make us better, even if as a leader, it's not something that you wanted either. But if you can make that shift to, I'm going to go through this because I know it's the right thing, or because it's what my organization is doing. How can I grow through this? How can I become better? How can I help my team become better and learn how to be more adaptable? Focus on what you can control, not on what you can't control. You can control your behaviors, your actions. You cannot control your emotions, but you can control what you do with your emotions. You can control if you decide to build your people up or to just hammer them with tactics, strategies, and information, or if you're pouring into them. When you pour into your people and build them up, that's when you truly harness the power of change. So hopefully this webinar has given you a couple of aha moments, or maybe even some breakthrough moments in your leadership. The next step is an important step. Insights or learning themselves are actually inert, meaning they're static. It's not anything until you do something with it. So the danger is having an aha moment and actually using that to shrink back and be like, well, she said we just run on autopilot 95% of our day, so it is what it is. I can't change it. Please don't do that. Please use that as knowing I can still make changes, that I can change that autopilot to the programs that are running the way I want them to run for me and for my team. I can make some shifts. So how we do that is by continuing to learn and grow and by applying it. Write down one thing you're going to do after this webinar and apply right away. And if you want to grow in any of the areas that I've talked about today, 2 of the workshops that I would recommend would be expanding your emotional intelligence or leading change in a complex world. These 2 workshops allow you to practice the pause, first of all. They're full-day workshops, 2 and 3-day workshops for a purpose, because we want you to be able to actually be fully immersed in this content, to shut off the autopilot of things that are running so that you can really form the foundation for making some big shifts in your leadership. So I really encourage you to check out those workshops. Those courses, I have taught them, and there are a ton of other great instructors as well, and I've seen significant change in our students personally and professionally after those workshops. At the very least, write down one thing from this webinar that you're going to apply to your leadership. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you in a future webinar or in a future course. And I will let my Ann cover the rest. Maybe.
Thank you so much. Totally appreciate you presenting on our behalf. Before we go through the rest of the deck, if you have any questions, please take a moment to type them into the questions box. I know we're getting to the top of the hour, but we'll get to them shortly. You want to get to the next slide, Erin, really quickly here.
Oh, yeah.
Just wanted to let everyone know. No problem.
On my other screen, but not on, whoops.
Just to let everyone know that New Horizons, we've been teaching virtual training since 2001. All of our facilitators and instructors are trained to teach face-to-face and virtually. And specifically our Center of Leadership and Development courses, we've had great success in teaching that online, and we have 50 to 60 post-class resources for additional practice and guidance. So please, if you're interested in what was presented today on this webinar, or if you have any questions really just regarding what's available to you, just contact your local center for more information. You can just go onto newhorizons.com and do a quick zip code search and find the center nearest you. Also, webinar schedule is up today. Just click on the webinars link as well, just to see what is coming up down the pipeline and register for any upcoming sessions that you may be interested in. And finally, just a quick reminder that I'll be sending out a recording link to today's webinar for everyone to share, review, or pass on to everyone. So just a few quick questions here for you, Erin. So this person says, I have taken over mobility management for the VP for over a year now. She does rank above me, so I do not have the ability to completely push her out. She's resistant to change and very old-fashioned in the way she has been handling our phone system for years. Within the past year, I've completely changed the system and the way we operate. This has allowed the company to save, over $100,000. Do you have advice on how to get her to accept the change and not interfere with my system?
So if I'm understanding right, Maya, this is her supervisor, his or her?
Yes, not so much a supervisor, but someone who just ranks above her.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is a great question, and something that we deal with very frequently, or I have dealt with frequently. So your team, you're focusing on building up your team, you're applying all these things, you're leading, a team who maybe embraces change, but other groups or even supervisors are not necessarily supportive of that. The biggest thing that I would suggest, definitely all the things that we talked about today, but focusing on the relationship. And I know this becomes hard, especially when people you feel like are resistant to what you are wanting to do professionally. But the more we can focus on finding out what's going on for them, what is their resistance? What has been their resistance? And then also building up that relationship, finding out, like I think of an example for me personally that a very similar dynamic happened. And once I got to know that person better, I found out that they had been through a very similar dynamic, and this change happened, and then their job was actually eliminated because they felt threatened by, what had happened as a result. And so once that relationship was formed was actually when that came out in that conversation. This person may or may not tell you that, but I can tell you the more that you get to know them and kind of lean into that discomfort, over communicating with them and pouring into, finding out their concerns and addressing them, you may be able to uncover, what some of those resistance things are. At the very least, you might, even if you don't uncover it, pouring into that relationship will only help build up your skills. And, the other people in the organization will see, your importance on, you're not going to push them away just because they're resistant to what you want.
Great. I know we're at the top of the hour, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Erin, as always, for presenting on behalf of New Horizons. With that being said, everyone, please have a good rest of your day. The webinar has concluded. You may now log off. Thank you.
Thank you.